video series entitled A Simple Way to Identify Grammatical Names and Functions of Expressions in WAEC and NECO Comprehension passages. When we released the first episode of this series sometime last year, it got the attention of some viewers who became inquisitive to learn more on the subject. My engagement in the comment section has informed the sense of creating more episodes on this topic. Whereas in the first episode, we focused on how to identify grammatical names and functions of expressions. In the second episode, we shall discuss how to differentiate between phrases and clauses. In the third episode, we shall attempt to investigate how to test for grammatical names of expressions in comprehension passages. In other words, how to confirm grammatical names of expressions. Then finally, in the fourth episode, we shall attempt to discuss how to identify the grammatical functions of adjectival clauses, specifically in expressions. This series promises to be highly rewarding. Therefore, I implore you to come along with us in all the videos, all the episodes in this series, and you will get a reward for your time and effort. Welcome to the fourth and final episode of our video series entitled A Simple Way to Identify the Grammatical Names and Functions of Expressions in WAEC and NECO Comprehension passages. Now, in this final video, we want to investigate how to determine the grammatical functions of adjectival phrases and clauses. Like, I got so many questions in the comment section of the first episode where students wanted to know whether adjectival phrases or clauses actually qualify or whether they modify. You know that adjectives in general perform the function of qualifying. And can we also say that adjectives modify? Is it right to say adjectives qualify or adjectives modify? So that's going to be an issue. But at the end of this lesson, you will understand that plain adjectives qualify while adjectival phrases or adjectival clauses modify. Right. So let us begin this way. First of all, by trying to define adjectival phrases or clauses very quickly. Here we go. What is an adjectival phrase and what is an adjectival clause? An adjectival phrase or clause is a relative phrase or a relative clause because it begins with a relative pronoun such as who, whose, which, and that. So that is what we mean by an adjectival phrase or an adjectival clause. Now we move forward to the second aspect of our definition. What is their function or noun? And that is the purpose of this video, to investigate the grammatical function of adjectival phrases or clauses. Now, here we go. We actually have so many tests or so many ways of investigating the grammatical functions of adjectives and expressions. But for the purpose of this video and based on our level, we are just going to adopt these two, which include extraction test and meaning test. So let us take the first one and find out how it works. Now, here we go. The first one, the extraction test. How do we use this method to determine the function of an adjectival clause or phrase? You will understand that an adjectival clause or phrase is performing the function of modification when you extract it from an expression and the expression is still grammatically correct. Then you know that the function of that clause or phrase is that of modification. Conversely, when you extract the phrase from the parent expression, that is, from the original expression, and the grammatical structure of that original expression is altered, then you know that the function is that of qualification. So this is how you can use the extraction test to determine whether an adjectival clause is modifying or whether it is qualifying. When we get to the second method, that is the second test, which is meaning test, I will explain this further. And it's going to correlate with what I have just explained here. We're going to get to understand why extracting the clause or the phrase from the original expression can possibly destroy its grammatical structure by the time we start explaining the meaning test. But in the meantime, let's consider a few examples to demonstrate how the extraction test can differentiate between the function of modifying and qualifying. Now, here we go. The first one, that's the original sentence. And it reads thus: the book which is read is on the table. Which is read is an adjectival clause. Of course, it starts with which and it contains a final verb. Now, what we are trying to do is to test whether this part of the sentence, in other words, this clause, whether it is modifying or whether it is qualifying in this sentence. And of course, we said that the adjectival phrase or clause usually qualifies the noun that it comes after, automatically the book. So, is this phrase, or rather is this clause qualifying the book, or it is modifying it? By extraction tests, we have established that when you remove the phrase or the clause from the sentence and the sentence is still grammatically sensible, then you would know that the function of that expression, of the underlined expression, is that of modifying. So let's try it out and see what you are going to get. Now, here we go. Results. When we extract the underlined clause, then the result would become the book is on the table. Wow. Is that not grammatically correct? Of course, it's perfect. The book is on the table is a perfect grammatical expression. In other words, the extraction of the clause did not alter the original meaning of the original sentence. That means this clause, which is on the table, is modifying the book. In other words, it is adding extra meaning or additional information to the noun, and that is the meaning of modification. That is, to add additional description to the noun in context. That is what we mean by modify, to restructure, to reshape. Now, here is the second example. The original expression reads thus: the woman who lives next door is a talented painter. The expression we are considering is who lives next door. Now, this expression is an adjectival clause because it begins with a relative pronoun and contains a final verb, lives. Now, we want to use the extraction method to prove that this underlying expression is modifying the noun or the subject of the sentence, the woman. To do that, we're going to extract it just like we did to the previous one. Now, here is the result. When we extract the adjectival clause from the previous sentence, what we are going to get is the woman is a talented painter. Perfect. This is a grammatically stable expression. It is grammatically complete and sensible. Therefore, it implies this clause, who lives next door, is performing the function of modifying the noun, the woman, which is the subject of the sentence or the noun that it comes after. And that is exactly the definition of the modification function of adjectival phrases or clauses. They only add extra material or extra description to the noun. In other words, without them, the sentence is going to be perfectly understood or perfectly clear and grammatically correct and well described. So they only supply additional description. Therefore, this expression, who lives next door, is modifying the woman. It is not qualifying it. And when are we going to say that an expression like this is qualifying rather than modifying? from the second test parameter, which we introduced in the beginning of this video, we established that when you remove the underlined expression, or that is the underlined phrase or clause, and the parent sentence is no longer grammatically stable or perfect, then you know that the function of that clause or phrase that you removed, okay, is that of qualifying and not that of modifying. Now let's have some examples to demonstrate that. Now this is what we have to test for the qualifying function of adjectival clauses or phrases by extraction method. So for the original sentence, we have only the students who studied hard passed the exam, and we are considering the clause who studied hard. Of course, this is an adjectival material because it starts with the relative pronoun who, and it contains a final verb studied. Now, let us carry out extraction test on this sentence and find out the results. So, here we go. Upon extraction, we have only the students pass the exam. That is after we have extracted who studied hard. Now let's think about this result critically. Only the students pass the exams. So when you look at this result very closely, you will discover that it has been grammatically altered. Only the students pass. Which students passed the exams? Only the students passed. Of course, students were supposed to pass. So which particular students have now passed the exam? As far as this result is concerned, it is not clear. Whereas the parent sentence told us that the student who passed, or rather, the student who studied had passed. But the extraction reduced the sentence to something like only the student passed. Okay, were teachers expected to pass? So you will find that this result is going to raise so many questions. Okay, it's going to raise so many questions in the minds of listeners. Only the student passed. Is it teachers that were supposed to pass? Is it parents that were supposed to pass? But students were supposed to write the exam and pass. Whereas the original expression, like I said initially, says only the student who studied hard. So this who studied hard is qualifying the students. So based on the test parameter that when the extracted phrase or clause alters the grammatical structure and meaning of the expression, then you know that the function of that expression is that of qualification. Now, let's try out another example. I guess you would understand it better. Now, here's the second example. The person who called you earlier is your boss. Now, we are considering the clause who called you earlier. It is an adjectival clause because it begins with who and it contains a final verb. Right. Let's perform extraction on this original sentence and find out what we are going to get. Now, here is the result. The person is your boss. Wow. You can see that after extracting who called you earlier, the grammatical structure of the rest part of the sentence has been damaged. And what we have is the person is your boss. Which person is your boss? Whereas the parent material says the person who called you earlier is your boss. So the first or original sentence has specificities. In other words, it has limits or limitations or restrictions on the subject. And that is where we are going right now on meaning test. So we're going to say that the function of this expression who called you earlier is that of qualification, because by extracting it from the sentence, it alters the grammatical structure or the grammatical completeness of the results. So this is how to test for qualifying. When the grammatical completeness of the resultant expression is altered, then you know that the underlined clause or phrase is performing the function of qualification and not that of modification. Whereas when you remove the expression, you perform extraction, and the grammatical structure, the grammatical completeness of the original sentence is not altered, then you know that it is performing the function of modification. So this is how to use extraction test to determine the grammatical function of adjectival phrases. Before we go, let's try out the second method, which is the meaning test. If you have difficulties with this first method, you are definitely going to get it through with the meaning tests. Now, here we go with the second test, which is the meaning test. How does this test work? Number one, the modifying function. Now, the adjectival phrase or clause is modifying the noun or pronoun in a sentence if it provides additional information about that noun or the pronoun. So what are we saying with this? If the adjectival phrase or clause is simply supplying additional information, additional description of the noun, then you would say that it is modifying that noun or the pronoun in question. What about the qualifying method? If the adjectival phrase or clause places a restriction on the noun or narrows its reference down to a specific subset, then you would say that it is qualifying that noun or the pronoun. Now, let's see how the meaning test is related to the extraction test. You would recall that in the course of our explanation of the extraction test, we did say that when you extract the clause or the phrase from the parent sentence, the sentence would still retain its grammatical structure. It will still become grammatically sensible. That is because what you have just removed from it, that is the noun, the clause or the phrase, okay, was only adding extra information. Now, what is the connection between how the extraction test and the meaning test both demonstrate the qualifying function of adjectival phrase or clause? Now, you will recall that in the course of our explanation of the extraction test, we did establish that when you extract the clause or the phrase from the parent sentence, the grammatical structure of the sentence will be altered. Now, the grammatical structure of the parent sentence is going to be altered based on meaning test again if it was initially placing a restriction or limiting the description of that noun to a particular subset, so that by the time you remove that specification or that restriction kind of description from the parent sentence, then the remaining sentence will become destabilized or rather incomplete or grammatically words disorganized. Now, this is the summary of what you are talking about. Based on meaning test, we understand that the phrase or the clause is just providing additional information. So in agreement with the extraction test, when you remove it, it will not make any significant impact on the parent sentence because it was just providing additional information. Now, what about the modifying function? We understand that based on the meaning test, the phrase or the clause is restricting the noun to a particular subset, and that is the more reason extracting it will destabilize the grammatical structure of the parent sentence. Now, here we go. The book which is read is on the table. Now, which is read is an adjectival clause, right? We want to carry out the meaning test to demonstrate the modifying function of this clause. I will say that if it is just providing additional information about the noun, okay, that it comes after, then it is modified. Let's check it out. The book which is read. If we have to rewrite this, we would have something like, the book is on the table. Fine. So that means which is read is just descriptive. In other words, it's just providing additional information about the book. So without that additional information, we can still understand what is being implied or what is being said. So we're going to say that the book is on the table. That's perfect. So the message is passed. The information is clear without the underline or without the phrase or the clause. So then we are going to conclude that which is on the table is simply adding extra information to the sentence. Therefore, the function of this underline is that of modifying. Let's have another example. Now, here's the second example. The woman who lives next door is a talented painter. Now, the clause we are considering is who lives next door, which we have already established is an adjectival clause. Now, when you look at this clause very well, it is adding extra information to the woman in this sentence. Therefore, we're going to say that the function is that of modification. Now, let's prove it. Now, here is it. The woman is a talented painter. So this sentence is still grammatically perfect without the descriptive clause, which is who lives next door. So that means who lives next door is just adding extra information descriptive of the woman. Therefore, the function of this clause is that of modification. Now, let's go over to some examples that demonstrate the qualifying function of adjectival phrases or clauses based on meaning tests. Now, here we go with the second example. Only the student who studied hard passed the exam. If you look at this clause very closely, it is narrowing down the reference of students to a particular subset in this context. Someone might ask, what about if we say that it is adding extra information to the students that pass the exams? It is doing more than that in this sentence. So it is not just adding extra information here. So that function of adding extra information has been overruled by its limiting function. So the limiting function has superseded its addition of extra information in this context. Because what is mostly important in this context now is that the students that are in the school are now being recategorized or being grouped or constricted to a particular group in this context. So that is why we are going to say that this clause is performing the function of qualifying based on meaning text, in that it is restricting the reference of student to a particular subset. Now here we go with the second example. The person who called you earlier is your boss. And we are considering the clause who called you earlier. When you look at this clause very closely, you would understand that it is trying to specify the particular person that called this fellow. And it is trying to differentiate this person from the many people that are probably around the person, and or from the many people that may have called the person over that particular period of time. Therefore, we are going to say that this clause is narrowing down the reference of this person to a particular subset. This is what we have said so far. We know that in English grammar, we have plain words which come as single words, and we also have adjectival phrases or clauses which come in groups. Now take a good note of the fact that those plain words can stand in the position of attributive or as predicative, and they typically function this way. That is, to place a confinement on the noun that they are qualifying in those expressions. People might be tempted to think that in that way they are adding additional information. And I remember explaining in this lesson that they go beyond adding information when you look at them constructively. When you look at the expression critically, you will discover that it is not just adding information to that very expression, but it is trying to place a limit, or is trying to place a restriction on it in that context. This is what plain adjectives typically do. But also take note that plain adjectives can modify. You can have some context where they are not limiting, and where you can extract them and the sentence still makes perfect sense. Take note of that. However, in the case of adjectival phrases or clauses, they typically modify, they do not qualify. So what that means is that if you carry out extraction test on them, the remaining sentence or parent sentence is still going going to be grammatically sensible. And when you look at them constructively, you will discover that they are simply providing additional information to the noun in that very sentence. So this is a summary of what we have discussed so far. So with that, we come to the end of this fourth episode and ultimately the final episode in our series on a simple way to identify the grammatical names and functions of expressions in WAEC and NECO comprehension passages. I do hope you grab something from this lesson and ultimately from the entire series. If so, can you drop your comments in the comment section down below the video? And remember to share with those that you think might need it, and also to subscribe. See you in our next series.